In the shadows between wilderness and civilization, some wounds never truly heal. They merely wait like winter frost beneath autumn leaves. Montana's Aspen Ridge stands proud against the darkening sky, a place where legends whisper through ancient pines. They speak of a black stallion that moves like midnight, untamed, untouchable. A ghost, some say, a guardian, others believe. What calls to a 13-year-old girl with copper hair and silenced grief? What pulls her into storm-lashed forests on the night everything changes? When the line between animal and ally blurs, when family secrets rise like mist from frozen ground, when corporate greed threatens to bury both truth and wilderness forever, who will answer the call? Some connections transcend words. Some mysteries demand to be uncovered no matter the cost. Some hearts once broken find their strength in the very wilderness that others fear. Listen now. The wilderness calls. Autumn's final breath swept through Aspen Ridge, Montana. The wind carried a biting chill that whispered promises of the harsh winter to come. Crimson and gold leaves danced their way to the forest floor, creating a tapestry of color that contrasted with the darkening skies. The mountains stood as silent sentinels over the small town nestled at their feet, a place where wilderness and civilization maintained a delicate, increasingly threatened balance. 13-year-old Lily Morgan stared out the window of her grandfather's rustic cabin, her reflection ghosting against the backdrop of dying daylight. Her copper-red hair fell in unruly waves around a face that had forgotten how to smile. In her hand, she clutched a worn leather journal, its pages filled with her mother's neat handwriting and detailed sketches of wild horses. 8 months had passed since the avalanche claimed her mother's life, but time had done little to dull the pain. The cabin door creaked open, and Carl Morgan's weathered figure appeared, his 6'2" frame still imposing despite his 68 years. The former forest ranger's face was a map of deep lines and old scars, physical reminders of a life lived in these rugged mountains. "Dinner's ready," he said, his voice gruff with disuse. Communication between them rarely extended beyond these necessary exchanges. Lily nodded without turning, her fingers tracing the outline of a black stallion her mother had drawn on the last completed page of the journal. She wondered, not for the first time, what her mother had seen in those final days before the avalanche swept her research camp away. The silence between grandfather and granddaughter stretched like a chasm neither knew how to bridge. 8 months of living together had done little to ease their shared grief or the awkwardness that defined their relationship. Carl had never expected to be raising a teenage girl at his age, especially not one as withdrawn as Lily had become. And Lily had never imagined being uprooted from her life in Seattle to live in this isolated cabin with a grandfather she barely knew. Dinner passed in familiar silence. Fork against plate, the occasional scrape of a chair, the crackling fire in the stone hearth. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the pines that surrounded the cabin, their branches scratching against the roof like fingernails. "Storm's coming," Carl muttered, more to himself than to Lily. "First big one of the season." Lily glanced out the window. Dark clouds had gathered, obscuring the mountains. Her mother had loved storms, said they cleared the air, made everything fresh again. Another memory that brought equal measures of comfort and pain. Later that night, as rain lashed against her bedroom window, Lily sat cross-legged on her bed, a sketch pad balanced on her knees. The room was Spartan, a bed, a desk, a small bookshelf filled with field guides and nature journals. The walls were adorned with her drawings, all in dark, muted tones. Horses running through shadowed forests, mountains shrouded in mist. A lone figure standing at the edge of a precipice. Her pencil moved across the paper, creating yet another image of the mountains in twilight. She'd been drawing the same scene repeatedly since arriving in Aspen Ridge, trying to capture something just beyond her understanding. A feeling, a memory, a warning. The storm intensified, thunder rolling across the valley. Lightning illuminated her room in brief, harsh flashes. Then cutting through the tempest came a sound that made Lily freeze. A horse's neigh, high-pitched, pain-filled, desperate. She dropped her sketch pad and moved to the window, wiping condensation from the glass. Another flash of lightning revealed nothing but the rain-soaked yard and the dark wall of trees beyond. The sound came again, unmistakable even over the howling wind. A horse in agony. Lily grabbed her raincoat from the hook behind her door, pulled on her boots and glanced toward her grandfather's room. His door remained closed, his light off. The old man slept deeply, especially on nights when he'd had his customary 2 fingers of whiskey before bed. Moving silently through the cabin, she took her grandfather's flashlight from the kitchen drawer and slipped outside into the storm. The rain hit her like tiny needles, soaking through her coat almost immediately. The wind whipped her hair across her face as she pointed the flashlight toward the tree line. The beam seemed feeble against the overwhelming darkness, but she pushed forward, drawn by another desperate neigh. "Hello," she called, her voice swallowed by the storm. "Where are you?" She entered the forest where the dense canopy offered some protection from the rain. The beam of her flashlight bounced off wet tree trunks and glistening undergrowth. The sound had come from deeper in, she was certain. Lily moved carefully, mindful of the slippery ground and exposed roots. Her mother had taught her how to navigate these woods, how to read the language of the forest. It was one of the few connections she still felt to her. This knowledge passed from mother to daughter. A branch snapped somewhere to her left, and Lily swung the flashlight in that direction. For a heartbeat, her beam caught a pair of reflective eyes tall as her shoulder. Then they were gone. "Wait," she called, stumbling forward. The trees thinned, opening into a small clearing. Lily swept her flashlight across the space and gasped when the beam found its target. A horse black as midnight, powerful and wild, was struggling against a metal trap that had clamped around its back leg. With each movement, the jagged teeth dug deeper, drawing blood that ran dark against its ebony coat. The animal reared in panic and pain when her light hit its eyes. Lily lowered the beam. "Easy," she whispered, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Easy now." The horse snorted, pawing the ground, its sides heaving with exertion. As it turned, Lily noticed a distinctive white crescent-shaped mark on its forehead, like a sliver of moon against the night sky. Recognition flashed through her. The locals spoke of this horse eclipse, they called it. The mountain ghost, a wild stallion that had evaded every attempt at capture. Her mother had mentioned it in her journal, described it as the leader of the wild herd she'd been studying. "I won't hurt you," Lily said softly, inching closer. "I want to help." The horse's ears flicked toward her voice, but it remained tense, ready to bolt, despite the trap that held it captive. Lily had never seen such a magnificent animal up close. Its muscles rippled beneath a coat that seemed to absorb the darkness around them. She set the flashlight on a nearby rock, angling it to illuminate the trap without shining directly in Eclipse's eyes. It was a vicious thing of rusted metal and sharp teeth, illegal in these parts for decades. Someone had set it deliberately, perhaps targeting this specific horse. "Who would do this to you?" she murmured, her anger momentarily displacing her fear. Lily knew she needed to act quickly. The wound was bleeding steadily and the storm showed no signs of abating. She remembered what her mother had written about approaching wild horses: slow movements, calm energy, respect for their space. "I'm going to free you," she told Eclipse, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But you need to stay still." The horse watched her with intelligent eyes that seemed to evaluate her intentions. Lily moved closer, her hands visible, her movements deliberate. When she was just a few feet away, Eclipse snorted and shifted, causing the trap to bite deeper. "Please," Lily whispered. "Trust me." Something in her tone must have reached the frightened animal. Eclipse stilled, though its flanks trembled with tension and pain. Lily examined the trap from a safe distance. It was an old design, but the mechanism was simple enough: a pressure spring that needed to be compressed to release the jaws. The problem was the strength required. Her mother would have known exactly what to do. "Mom, help me," she whispered to the stormy night. Taking a deep breath, Lily positioned herself near the trap, careful to stay away from the horse's powerful legs. She placed both hands on the spring mechanism and pushed down with all her strength. The metal resisted, slick with rain and blood. "Come on," she grunted, her arms trembling with effort. Eclipse sensed the moment of freedom approaching and shifted impatiently. One of its hooves caught Lily's shoulder, sending her sprawling backward. Pain exploded through her arm, and for a moment stars danced in her vision. But she couldn't give up now. Ignoring the throbbing in her shoulder, she scrambled back to the trap and tried again, leveraging her body weight more effectively. This time she felt the mechanism give slightly. "Just a little more," she gasped. With a final surge of desperate strength, Lily pressed down. The trap's jaws relaxed enough for Eclipse to pull its injured leg free. The horse immediately backed away, but to Lily's surprise, it didn't flee. Instead, it stood at the edge of the clearing, watching her with those intelligent, fathomless eyes. Lily sat back, suddenly exhausted. Rain plastered her hair to her face, and her shoulder pulsed with pain where Eclipse had struck her. She should return to the cabin before her grandfather discovered her absence. But something kept her rooted to the spot, the strange connection she felt with this wild creature. "You're welcome," she said softly. As if in response, Eclipse took a step toward her. Lily held her breath as the magnificent horse approached its movements, cautious but deliberate. When it was just a few feet away, Eclipse lowered its head in what almost seemed like a bow. Time suspended in that moment. The storm, the pain, even the grief that had been her constant companion these past months all receded. There was only Lily and this wild spirit acknowledging each other in the heart of the forest. Then Eclipse raised its head and turned, limping slightly, but moving with purpose toward a path that led deeper into the woods. At the edge of the clearing, it paused and looked back at her. An invitation. Logic told Lily to return home. The storm was worsening, she was soaked through, and her grandfather would be furious if he discovered her midnight adventure. But something stronger than logic pulled her forward, the same intuition that had guided her mother in her research. "Okay," she said. "I'm coming." She retrieved the flashlight and followed Eclipse into the forest. The horse moved steadily, despite its injury, occasionally looking back to ensure she was still following. They traveled deeper into the wilderness than Lily had ever ventured beyond the trails she knew. The terrain grew steeper, more challenging. Lily slipped several times on the wet ground, her hands and knees becoming muddy as she caught herself. But each time she faltered, Eclipse waited patiently for her to regain her footing. After what seemed like hours but was likely only 30 minutes, they reached a rocky outcropping. Eclipse led her to an opening, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation, the entrance to a small cave. The horse stopped at the entrance, its breath creating small clouds in the cold air. It seemed to be waiting for her to make the next move. Lily hesitated. Caves meant potential dangers, unstable ground, wild animals getting lost. But Eclipse's steady gaze reassured her. With the flashlight leading the way, she ducked into the opening. The cave was shallow but dry, offering welcome shelter from the storm that continued to rage outside. As Lily swept her light across the rocky floor, something caught her attention, a splash of faded color against the stone. She moved closer and felt her heart stutter. It was a piece of fabric, torn dirty but unmistakable, the distinctive pattern of her mother's favorite field jacket. With trembling fingers, Lily picked it up. A dark stain marred the material, dried blood. She held it to her nose, and beneath the musty scent of the cave, she could still detect the faint traces of her mother's perfume, a simple woodsy scent she'd always worn in the field. "Mom was here," she whispered, looking at Eclipse with wide eyes. The horse nickered softly as if confirming her realization. Questions flooded Lily's mind. How had this piece of her mother's jacket ended up in this remote cave? The avalanche site was miles from here on the other side of the ridge. Had her mother been here before the disaster? Or, a thought too painful to fully form, had she somehow survived the initial slide only to... Lily clutched the fabric to her chest, tears mingling with the rainwater on her cheeks. Eclipse moved closer, its warm breath ghosting over her hair in what felt like an attempt at comfort. "Thank you for showing me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Outside, the storm began to subside, the thunder now a distant rumble. Lily knew she needed to return home before dawn broke, and her grandfather discovered her absence. She carefully folded the piece of fabric and tucked it into her pocket, evidence of a mystery she was only beginning to unravel. Eclipse led her back through the forest, finding an easier path than the one they'd taken up. The horse moved with confidence even in the dark, and Lily followed trustingly. When they reached the edge of the woods near her grandfather's cabin, Eclipse stopped. "Will I see you again?" Lily asked suddenly, reluctant to part from this unexpected ally. Eclipse tossed its head, the crescent mark catching the faint light of the emerging moon. Then, with a final look at Lily, the horse turned and disappeared into the shadows of the forest. Lily stood for a moment, watching the spot where Eclipse had vanished. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt something stir within her, a purpose, a connection, a reason to move forward instead of remaining trapped in grief. The lights in the cabin were still off when she quietly made her way back inside. She peeled off her wet clothes in the bathroom, wincing at the bruise already forming on her shoulder. After drying off and changing into warm pajamas, she returned to her bedroom and carefully placed the fragment of her mother's jacket in her desk drawer. As she finally slid into bed, exhaustion claimed her immediately, but her dreams for once were not filled with avalanches and loss. Instead, she dreamed of running with Eclipse through moonlit forests, searching for someone just beyond the next ridge. Carl Morgan noticed the change in his granddaughter immediately the next morning. Her movements were stiff, she favored her right shoulder, and there was mud under her fingernails that she hadn't completely scrubbed away. But it was the look in her eyes that truly caught his attention. The dull sheen of grief had been replaced by something else, a spark of purpose. He didn't ask questions. Questions led to conversations, and conversations inevitably led to emotions neither of them was equipped to handle. Instead, he silently placed an extra pancake on her plate and pretended not to notice when she slipped half her bacon into a napkin and tucked it into her pocket. Lily spent the morning in her room ostensibly working on the distance learning assignments from her school in Seattle. But once she heard Carl leave for his weekly trip into town for supplies, she quickly gathered her backpack, the napkin-wrapped bacon, and her mother's journal. The forest welcomed her with the gentle rustling of leaves and the occasional call of a bird. The storm had washed everything clean, leaving behind a crispness in the air that hinted at the winter to come. Lily followed the same path she had taken the night before, hoping Eclipse might be nearby. At the clearing where she'd found the horse trapped, Lily stopped. Daylight revealed details she'd missed in the dark boot prints in the mud that weren't her own, and the metal trap she'd sprung now lying open like a sinister mouth. She approached it cautiously. Up close, she could see that it wasn't as rusted as she'd initially thought. This trap was relatively new, placed here recently and deliberately. Trapping was strictly regulated in this area, and leg-hold traps like this were illegal. Someone was breaking the law and targeting the wild horses her mother had been studying. A twig snapped behind her, and Lily whirled around, heart racing. But it was Eclipse who emerged from the trees, moving cautiously, ears pricked forward in recognition. "You came back," Lily breathed relief washing through her. The stallion approached with less wariness than the night before. In daylight, his magnificence was even more apparent, coat gleaming like polished obsidian muscles rippling beneath. The white crescent on his forehead stood out starkly against his dark coat. His injured leg showed a raw, angry wound, but he put weight on it, suggesting the damage wasn't crippling. Lily slowly unwrapped the bacon from her napkin and held it out on her flat palm. "I brought you something." Eclipse's nostrils flared as he caught the scent. He moved forward with careful dignity and delicately took the offering from her hand, his lips velvety against her palm. "I need to clean that wound," Lily said, gesturing to his leg. "Will you let me?" She unzipped her backpack and removed a small first aid kit, one of many practical gifts her mother had given her over the years. Inside were antiseptic wipes, antibiotic ointment, and gauze. Not ideal for treating a horse, but better than nothing. To her surprise, Eclipse stood perfectly still as she approached his injured leg. She spoke softly as she worked, explaining each step before she took it. The wound was deep but clean, the trap's teeth having made puncture marks rather than tears. Still, it needed treatment to prevent infection. "This might sting," she warned as she gently cleaned the wound with an antiseptic wipe. Eclipse's muscles tensed, but he remained still, his trust in her, both touching and bewildering. When she finished applying the ointment in a light wrap of gauze, she stood back admiring her handiwork. "That should help," she said, "but you should probably stay off it as much as possible." Eclipse nudged her shoulder with his nose, nearly knocking her over. Lily laughed, a rusty sound she barely recognized as her own. How long had it been since she'd laughed? "You're welcome," she said, reaching up to stroke his neck. His coat was warm and smooth beneath her fingers. For the next hour, Lily sat on a fallen log while Eclipse grazed nearby. She opened her mother's journal and began to read entries from the months before the avalanche. Her mother had been tracking the wild horse herd for nearly a year, documenting their behaviors, migration patterns, and social structures. Eclipse featured prominently in her notes. The black stallion, Eclipse as I've named him, continues to demonstrate exceptional intelligence and leadership. He's adapted the herd's routes to avoid the areas where development has begun. Today I observed him leading the youngest foals across the river at its shallowest point, doubling back multiple times to ensure stragglers made it safely across. There's something almost supernatural about his awareness, as if he understands the broader threats to his herd beyond immediate predators. Another entry dated just 2 weeks before the avalanche caught Lily's attention. Someone has been tampering with my research markers. GPS points moved, camera traps disabled. RB increased his offer for the survey. Data today became quite insistent when I refused. Claims the development will proceed regardless. I've relocated my base camp deeper into the valley. Eclipse seems to be guiding the herd farther from established trails. Smart boy. I should follow his lead. RB. The initials nagged at Lily's memory. Then it clicked. Raymond Blackwood, the wealthy real estate developer her grandfather occasionally mentioned with undisguised contempt. He was behind the luxury resort project that threatened to encroach on the wilderness area. A final entry dated 3 days before the avalanche. Found more traps today, illegal ones. Reported to rangers but without proof of who set them. Not much they can do. Eclipse is keeping the herd in the high meadow safer there. I've discovered something extraordinary in the North Valley. Need more documentation before reporting. If confirmed, it could change everything. Meeting F tomorrow for backup. The entry ended there. 3 days later, her mother was gone, buried under tons of snow and rock. Or so everyone believed. Lily closed the journal, her mind racing. Who was F? What had her mother discovered? And how did it connect to the piece of jacket she'd found in the cave? She looked up to find Eclipse watching her intently, as if he understood the significance of what she just read. The connection she felt with this horse defied logic, yet she couldn't deny it. Eclipse had led her to the cave deliberately. Was he trying to tell her something about her mother? What do you know? She whispered. Eclipse tossed his head and began walking deeper into the forest, then stopped and looked back at her. Once again, an invitation. Lily hesitated only briefly before following. They traveled for nearly an hour, Eclipse setting a pace that accommodated both his injury and her shorter legs. The terrain grew increasingly unfamiliar, the forest denser. They crossed a small stream, climbed a gentle ridge, and descended into a valley Lily had never seen before. Here the forest opened into a meadow filled with late wildflowers and tall grasses. And there, grazing peacefully in the afternoon sun, was a herd of wild horses, about 20 in all, ranging from coal black to dappled gray, with several foals staying close to their mothers. Lily gasped at the beauty of the scene. These must be the horses her mother had been studying. Eclipse nickered softly and several horses raised their heads, ears pricked forward. A dappled mare with a foal at her side approached, touching noses with Eclipse in greeting. Your family, Lily murmured. She sat at the edge of the meadow, content to observe. Her mother had taught her that sometimes the greatest gift you could give wildlife was your patient, respectful attention. For nearly an hour she watched the herd interact, the complex social dynamics, the playful foals, the vigilant mares. Eclipse moved among them like a king, his presence commanding yet gentle. The sun began its westward descent, reminding Lily that she needed to return home before her grandfather did. With reluctance, she stood brushing grass from her jeans. I have to go, she told Eclipse, who had drifted back to her side. But I'll come back tomorrow. As if understanding, Eclipse escorted her to the path that would lead her back toward the cabin. At the edge of the meadow, he stopped, clearly unwilling to leave his herd. Lily stroked his neck one final time. Thank you for trusting me, she said. The journey back felt shorter, perhaps, because her mind was so full of everything she'd discovered. By the time the cabin came into view, Lily had made a decision. She would uncover the truth about what had happened to her mother, and she would protect Eclipse and his herd from whoever was threatening them. Carl's truck was already in the driveway when she emerged from the trees. Lily quickly tucked her mother's journal into her backpack and tried to compose her features into the neutral mask she typically wore around her grandfather. She found him in the kitchen, unpacking groceries with mechanical efficiency. His ranger-trained eyes missed nothing, scanning her from head to toe as she entered. Been out, he stated, rather than asked, his tone carefully neutral. Just walking, Lily replied, the half-truth sitting uncomfortably on her tongue. Looking at birds. Carl nodded, returning to his task. After a moment, he said, Town's buzzing about the Blackwood development. They're presenting the final plans at the town hall meeting next week. Lily's interest piqued at the name. Blackwood, as in Raymond Blackwood? You know him, Carl asked, eyebrows raised in surprise. Mom mentioned him in her journal, Lily said before she could stop herself. A shadow crossed Carl's weathered face. Your mother had concerns about his methods. It was the most he'd ever said about her mother since Lily had come to live with him. She pressed carefully. What kind of methods? Carl's jaw tightened. The kind that put profit above all else. He closed a cabinet with more force than necessary, then sighed. Dinner in an hour. The conversation was clearly over, but Lily's curiosity was just beginning to awaken. That night she added to her growing collection of sketches, but this time instead of shadowy forests and mountains, she drew a eclipse in his herd in the sunlit meadow. For the first time she used colors: the blue of the sky, the green of the grass, the various shades of the horses' coats. When she finished, she studied the drawing. It wasn't just the colors that were different. There was something else, a quality that had been missing from her art since her mother's death. Hope. The town of Aspen Ridge consisted of a main street lined with storefronts, many dating back to the early 1900s, and several residential streets that spread outward like spokes from a wheel. Most of the 5,000 residents worked in tourism, agriculture, or commuted to larger towns for employment. The wilderness was both their greatest asset and, some argued, their greatest limitation. Lily rarely visited town, preferring the solitude of the forest and her grandfather's cabin. But on Saturday morning, she found herself in the passenger seat of Carl's truck, bouncing down the dirt road that connected their property to civilization. "Why do I have to come?" she asked, watching the trees give way to scattered houses. "Because sitting alone in that room drawing all day isn't healthy," Carl replied gruffly. "And I need supplies from the hardware store." The real reason, unspoken between them, was that Carl didn't trust her alone at the cabin anymore. He'd noticed her frequent absences, the mud on her boots, the distracted look in her eyes. He didn't ask directly, but his increased vigilance spoke volumes. Lily had managed to visit Eclipse and the herd 3 more times that week, bringing supplies to continue treating the stallion's wound, which was healing nicely. Each visit deepened their bond and her determination to uncover the truth about her mother and the threats to the wilderness. Main Street was unusually busy for a Saturday morning. As Carl parked in front of Jensen's Hardware, Lily noticed a crowd gathered outside the community center. A large banner stretched across the building's entrance. "Aspen Ridge Renaissance, building our future." "What's happening there?" she asked. Carl's expression darkened. "Blackwood's giving the town a preview of his resort plans before the official meeting." Lily's pulse quickened. "Can we go see?" Carl looked surprised at her request but nodded. "After the hardware store. Won't take long." In Jensen's Hardware, Carl became engaged in a detailed conversation with the owner about pipe fittings. Lily wandered the aisles restlessly, her attention drawn to the voices drifting through the open front door from the gathering across the street. "Just going to look at the display," she told her grandfather, who acknowledged her with a distracted wave. Outside, the autumn air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke. Lily crossed Main Street and approached the crowd slipping between adults who paid her little attention. At the center of the community hall's main room stood a large architectural model on a table surrounded by glossy presentation boards. The model depicted a sprawling resort complex with multiple buildings, a golf course, and what appeared to be a private airstrip. It was positioned against a backdrop representing the mountains, the same wilderness where Eclipse and his herd lived, where her mother had conducted her research. A tall man in an expensive-looking suit was addressing the crowd, gesturing expansively at the model. Though in his 60s, Raymond Blackwood possessed the confident energy of a much younger man. His silver hair was impeccably styled, his smile practiced and persuasive. "The Aspen Ridge Mountain Resort will bring over 300 permanent jobs to our community," he was saying, his voice carrying the polished cadence of someone accustomed to public speaking. "Not to mention the economic boost from thousands of tourists year-round. This is the future of Aspen Ridge, friends, prosperity and growth, while preserving the natural beauty we all treasure." Lily studied him carefully. This was the man her mother had mentioned in her journal, the one who had insisted on her research data. His eyes, despite his smile, were calculating as they swept the crowd, measuring their reactions. "But what about the environmental impact?" a woman called from the crowd. "That valley is home to one of the last wild horse herds in the region." Blackwood's smile never faltered. An excellent question, Mrs. Harding. Environmental stewardship is one of our core values. We've commissioned extensive studies and will be creating a dedicated conservation area for the horses as part of the development. A zoo, you mean? Someone else muttered, though not loudly enough for Blackwood to acknowledge. Lily moved closer to the model, examining the area labeled Wild Horse Sanctuary, a small enclosure representing perhaps a tenth of the territory the herd currently roamed. Her stomach tightened with anger. "The North Valley is barely touched in your plans," observed a middle-aged man in a park ranger uniform. "Any particular reason?" A flicker of something annoyance concern crossed Blackwood's face before his smile reasserted itself. Phase 2, Development Ranger Collins. We're focusing on the southern approach first for logistical reasons. For into the North Valley, where her mother had discovered something extraordinary days before the avalanche. As Lily contemplated this connection, she became aware of someone watching her. A boy about her age stood on the opposite side of the model, his dark eyes fixed on her with uncomfortable intensity. There was something familiar about his features, the same aquiline nose and strong jawline as Raymond Blackwood. The boy moved around the table toward her. "You're Lily Morgan," he said. Not a question. Lily tensed. "How do you know that?" "Everyone knows about Dr. Morgan's daughter." He glanced toward Blackwood, who was now engaged with town officials. "I'm Ethan, Blackwood's son." Lily said nothing, studying him warily. Ethan Blackwood didn't have his father's polished charm. There was something awkward in his stance, a seriousness in his expression that seemed at odds with the confident sales pitch happening nearby. "I'm sorry about your mom," he said, his voice lowering. "She came to our house once to talk to my dad about her research." "When?" Lily asked sharply. "Last fall, before—" He hesitated. "Before the accident. They argued." Before Lily could ask more, a heavy hand fell on her shoulder. She looked up to find her grandfather standing behind her, his expression stormy as he glanced between her and Ethan. "Time to go, Lily," Carl said, his tone brooking no argument. As he steered her toward the exit, Lily glanced back. Ethan was watching them leave, his expression troubled. But it was Raymond Blackwood who caught her attention, his presentation momentarily forgotten as he stared at Lily and her grandfather with undisguised hostility. Outside, Carl marched toward his truck with long strides that forced Lily to jog to keep up. "What were you talking to the Blackwood boy about?" he demanded as they reached the vehicle. "Nothing," Lily said. "He just introduced himself." Carl's jaw worked as he started the engine. "Stay away from the Blackwoods, Lily, all of them." "Why?" she challenged, emboldened by everything she'd discovered in the past week. "Does it have something to do with what happened to Mom?" Carl's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. For a moment, Lily thought he might actually answer her. Then his expression shuddered. "We don't talk about that," he said flatly. "Maybe we should—" Lily's voice rose with 8 months of suppressed frustration and grief. "Mom's gone, and you act like she never existed. You haven't even told me exactly what happened in that avalanche." "Because I don't know," Carl roared, slamming his palm against the steering wheel. The sudden outburst of emotion from her normally reserved grandfather shocked Lily into silence. He took a deep breath, visibly struggling for control. "I don't know," he repeated quieter. They never recovered her body." The truck filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the rumble of the engine. Lily stared at her grandfather's profile, seeing for the first time the depth of pain he carried. Pain he'd been hiding as carefully as she hid her own. They drove home without speaking, the weight of unasked questions pressing down between them. As they turned onto the dirt road leading to the cabin, Lily spotted a figure at the edge of the forest, a man watching their approach. He stood unnaturally still, his posture suggesting military training. When the truck drew closer, he melted back into the trees like a shadow at noon. "Who was that?" Lily asked. Carl squinted in the direction she indicated. "Where?" "At the tree line. A man was watching us." Carl's expression grew guarded. "Probably just a hiker. Forest has public trails." But Lily noticed his eyes scanning the trees with increased vigilance, and the way his hand strayed to the glove compartment, where she knew he kept an old service pistol. That night sleep eluded her. Lily's mind raced with all she'd learned, her mother's cryptic journal entries, the piece of jacket in the cave, Ethan's mention of an argument between his father and her mother, the mysterious man at the forest's edge. pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet assemble. As moonlight filtered through her window, Lily made a decision. Tomorrow she would return to the cave where Eclipse had led her. There might be more clues there, something she'd missed in the darkness, an emotional shock of her first visit. She was just drifting off when a sound jerked her fully awake, the distinctive whinny of a horse close to the cabin. Eclipse. Lily slipped from her bed and moved to the window. There in the moonlit yard stood the black stallion. As if sensing her gaze, he looked directly at her window and pawed the ground impatiently. A warning, a summons. Either way, Lily knew she needed to answer. I've written the first part, 6,000 words of the Wilderness Call, based on your outline. This section introduces the main characters and establishes the core mystery surrounding Lily's mother, while developing the special connection between Lily and Eclipse. Lily didn't hesitate. She dressed quickly in the darkness, pulling on jeans, a sweater, and her hiking boots. She grabbed her backpack, stuffing it with her flashlight, mother's journal, and the first aid kit. Her heart raced as she eased her bedroom door open, listening for any sign that her grandfather was awake. The cabin remained silent except for the soft ticking of the old clock in the living room. Lily moved like a shadow through the darkened house, carefully lifting Carl's spare key from the hook by the back door. Outside, the night air bit at her exposed skin with frost-edged teeth. Winter was drawing closer with each passing day. Eclipse waited at the edge of the yard, a midnight sentinel against the silver-blue backdrop of the moonlit forest. His breath created misty clouds in the cold air. When he saw Lily approach, he tossed his head impatiently. "What is it?" she whispered, reaching out to touch his warm neck. "What's wrong?" In answer, Eclipse turned and began walking toward the trees, looking back to ensure she followed. The urgency in his movements was unmistakable. Something had disturbed the stallion enough to bring him to her home, something important. Lily followed without question, her trust in the horse now absolute. The forest at night was a different world. Shadows, deeper sounds magnified the boundary between reality and imagination, more permeable. But with Eclipse leading the way, Lily felt no fear. They didn't take the path to the meadow where the herd grazed. Instead, Eclipse led her northeast toward higher ground. The terrain grew steeper, challenging Lily's endurance. They climbed for nearly an hour, the forest gradually thinning as they gained elevation. Finally, they crested a ridge, and Eclipse stopped. Below them stretched a narrow valley, cradled between steep mountain walls. Even in the darkness, Lily could make out unnatural shapes scattered across the valley floor, rectangular structures that didn't belong in this wilderness. "What is this place?" she murmured. Eclipse nickered softly, then began picking his way down the slope. Lily followed her curiosity, mounting with each step. As they drew closer to the valley floor, the structures took clearer shape, half a dozen small cabins, arranged in a rough circle, a larger central building, and what appeared to be equipment sheds, a research station, her mother's secret base camp. Most of the buildings showed signs of damage, collapsed roofs, walls, partially caved in, evidence of the avalanche that had swept through this valley 8 months ago. The official search had focused on the other side of the mountain, where her mother's official research site had been established. Had anyone even known about this secondary camp, Eclipse led her to the largest structure, a cabin that had withstood the avalanche better than the others, though its northern wall was partially collapsed. Lily approached cautiously, aiming her flashlight at the weathered sign nailed beside the door. Morgan Research Station, authorized personnel only. Her breath caught. This was definitely her mother's place. But why had no one mentioned it during the search? Why wasn't it on any of the official maps? The door hung askew on broken hinges. Lily pushed it open, wincing at the groaning protest of the wood. Inside, chaos reigned: furniture, overturned papers, scattered everything covered in a layer of dust, and pine needles blown in through the broken wall. But unlike the abandoned feeling of the exterior, the interior bore signs of more recent disturbance. Footprints crisscrossed the dusty floor, and some of the debris had been shifted aside to create pathways. Someone had been here since the avalanche. Recently. Lily swept her flashlight around the room. A large map covered one wall, marked with pins and notations in her mother's handwriting. Red pins traced what appeared to be migration routes of the wild horse herd. Blue pins marked water sources. Yellow pins indicated something labeled unusual formations. A desk stood against the far wall, its surface cluttered with notebooks, rock samples, and equipment. Lily approached it slowly, her flashlight beam revealing a framed photograph half buried under scattered papers. Lily and her mother standing before a mountain lake, both smiling arms around each other. Lily picked it up her throat, tightening at the memory of that day, her 12th birthday, just over a year ago. She set the photo aside and began examining the notebooks. Most contained field observations, similar to those in the journal. She already had notes on the horse herd weather patterns and local wildlife. But one notebook bound in red leather stood out. Its pages were filled with diagrams, geological terms Lily only partially understood, and repeated references to the thermal anomaly. The final entry dated 3 days before the avalanche sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the cold night air. Confirmed presence of geothermal activity far beyond previously documented extent. Underground hot springs network stretches at least 15 kilometers beneath Northern Valley. Unique microbiome present potential new species. Evidence suggests mineral deposits of significant scientific and commercial value. Must secure site before B learns full extent. Meeting FC tomorrow for backup. If anything happens to me, all data encrypted on drive. Key phrase, Lily's constellation. Lily stared at the words, her mind racing. Geothermal activity, hot springs, new species, mineral deposits. This was what her mother had discovered. Something valuable enough that someone might want to keep it secret. Something that might have gotten her killed. And FC, could that be the man she'd glimpsed at the forest's edge? Someone her mother had trusted enough to call for backup? A soft thud from outside snapped Lily from her thoughts. Eclipse's warning neigh followed immediately. Someone was approaching. Lily quickly shoved the red notebook into her backpack along with the photograph. She clicked off her flashlight and ducked behind an overturned table, heart hammering against her ribs. Beams of light cut through the doorway as two figures entered the cabin. Their flashlights swept across the interior, pausing at the desk where Lily had just been standing. "Someone's been here," a male voice said, young, anxious. "Recently. Told you I saw lights moving up the ridge," replied a second voice, older, deeper, authoritative. "Keep looking. We need to find that drive before Morgan's girl or the old ranger do." Lily's breath caught. They were looking for her mother's research, and they knew about her and Carl. From her hiding place, she could see only their legs, one pair in expensive hiking boots, the other in worn work boots. "Dad, we've searched this place 3 times already," said the younger voice. "If the drive was here, we'd have found it." Dad. Was this Raymond Blackwood and his son Ethan? "It's here," the older man insisted. "She wouldn't have taken it with her that day. Too valuable." The beams of light moved methodically around the cabin, coming closer to Lily's hiding place. She pressed herself further into the shadows, scarcely daring to breathe. "What if someone else found it?" Ethan asked. "What if—" "No one else knows about this place," his father cut him off. "The official search never came this far north, and by the time the snow melted enough for anyone else to stumble across it, we'd already secured the area." Lily's mind reeled at the implications. Had Blackwood deliberately misdirected the search and rescue teams? Had he known all along about this secret research station? "I still don't understand why we can't just go ahead with the resort without worrying about this," Ethan said, his voice tinged with what sounded like guilt. "So what if there are hot springs? We could incorporate them into the development." "This isn't about hot springs, boy." Raymond's voice hardened. "If Morgan's research gets out, this entire valley could be designated a protected scientific preserve. No development, no resort, no lithium mining, nothing." Lithium. The word triggered a memory from her science class. Lithium was a key component in batteries, increasingly valuable in the shift toward clean energy. If her mother had discovered a significant lithium deposit— "The council meeting is in 3 days," Raymond continued. "By then I need all of Morgan's research contained. Keep looking." The flashlight beams moved closer to Lily's hiding place. She held her breath, pressing herself against the wall. But just as discovery seemed inevitable, a loud crash came from outside the cabin, followed by the sound of galloping hooves. "What the hell was that?" Raymond demanded. "Sounded like one of those wild horses," Ethan replied. "Should I check?" "Yes, I'll finish in here." Ethan's footsteps receded as he left the cabin. Raymond continued searching, muttering under his breath as he rifled through the remaining papers on the desk. Lily remained frozen in her hiding place silently, thanking Eclipse for the diversion. After what seemed like an eternity, Ethan called from outside. "Dad, come look at this." With a final frustrated sweep of his flashlight, Raymond left the cabin. The moment he was gone, Lily crept from her hiding place and moved to the broken wall. Through a gap in the collapsed timbers, she could see Raymond and Ethan standing about 50 yards away, their flashlights pointed at the ground. "Horse tracks," Ethan was saying, "but there's something else, boot prints. Small ones." "Someone's been up here." Raymond's voice was tight with anger. "Recently." Lily didn't wait to hear more. She slipped through the gap in the wall and into the shadows beyond, moving as silently as her mother had taught her. The darkness embraced her as she made her way around the perimeter of the camp, keeping low and using the damaged structures for cover. A soft nickering drew her attention to a copse of trees beyond the camp's edge. Eclipse waited there, pawing the ground impatiently. Lily hurried to him, relief washing through her. "Good boy," she whispered, stroking his neck. "You led them away." Eclipse turned and began moving away from the camp, setting a pace that allowed Lily to keep up despite the difficult terrain. They didn't return the way they'd come, instead circling around to approach the Morgan cabin from the west, using a stream bed for part of the journey to mask their tracks. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when they reached the edge of the yard. Carl's truck still sat in the driveway undisturbed. No lights shone from within the cabin. Lily had made it back before her grandfather discovered her absence. She turned to Eclipse, who stood watching her intently. "Thank you," she whispered, leaning her forehead against his warm neck. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The stallion nudged her gently, then turned and trotted back into the forest as the first rays of dawn filtered through the trees. Lily slipped back into the cabin and returned the spare key to its hook. In her room, she hid the red notebook beneath her mattress and collapsed onto her bed, exhaustion overtaking her despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Her last conscious thought before sleep claimed her was a realization her mother might have been murdered for what she'd discovered, and the killers were still searching for her research. "You look like you haven't slept," Carl observed over breakfast, his weathered face creased with concern. Lily shrugged, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate. "Bad dreams." It wasn't entirely a lie. Her fitful sleep had been plagued by fragmented nightmares, her mother trapped in an avalanche, while Raymond Blackwood watched from a distance, Eclipse running from shadowy figures, with Traps herself lost in a maze of underground tunnels filled with glowing blue water. Carl studied her for a moment longer, then sighed. "Thought we might go fishing today. Water's still open on the lower lake." The invitation surprised Lily. Her grandfather rarely suggested activities together, their coexistence more parallel than intertwined. Was this an olive branch, or was he simply trying to keep her where he could see her? "I have schoolwork." She said, the excuse sounding hollow even to her own ears. Carl's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Another time then." Guilt niggled at Lily as she watched him clear their plates. Her grandfather was trying in his own awkward way, but she couldn't confide in him, not yet, not without proof. And today she needed to find Frank Callahan, the mysterious FC, from her mother's notes. After Carl left to chop firewood, a task that would keep him occupied for hours, Lily returned to her room and retrieved the red notebook. She studied her mother's last entry again, focusing on the mention of an encrypted drive and the key phrase, Lily's constellation. Her constellation. Lily moved to her desk and opened the bottom drawer, removing a small wooden box her mother had given her on her 10th birthday. Inside lay a delicate silver necklace with a pendant in the shape of a constellation, Cygnus the Swan. Her namesake constellation, her mother had explained, because Lily had been born in late summer, when Cygnus dominated the northern sky. Lily had always assumed it was simply a sentimental gift. Now she wondered if it held a deeper purpose. She examined the pendant, carefully turning it over in her palm. The silver felt slightly heavier than it should for its size. On impulse, she pressed the central star of the constellation. Nothing happened. She tried twisting it, pulling it until finally, with a barely audible click, the pendant split in two, revealing a tiny USB drive nestled within. "Mom, you genius!" Lily whispered, a mixture of awe and grief washing through her. She connected the drive to her laptop, holding her breath as a password prompt appeared. "Lily's constellation," she typed. "Access denied." She tried Cygnus. Again denied. After several more attempts, she sat back frustrated. What exactly had her mother meant? Her gaze fell on the star chart that hung above her desk, a gift from her mother showing the night sky on Lily's date of birth. Cygnus was highlighted, but so were several other constellations visible that night. On the bottom of the chart, her mother had written a personal message. To my Lily, who shines brighter than Deneb ever could. Deneb, the brightest star in Cygnus. Lily typed Deneb into the password field. The drive unlocked, revealing dozens of files with scientific names and date stamps. Lily clicked through them, most containing data that meant little to her: chemical analyses, thermal readings, geological surveys. But one file labeled simply Summary contained a document written in her mother's clear, direct style. The thermal system beneath the North Valley represents one of the most significant undocumented geothermal resources in North America. Preliminary testing indicates water temperatures of 195, 210 degrees Celsius at relatively shallow depths, with an estimated reservoir capable of producing 50-plus megawatts of electricity. More significantly, the unique chemical composition of the hot springs has created an isolated ecosystem with at least 7 previously undocumented extremophile species. Of commercial interest will be the lithium-rich brine deposits, potentially one of the largest in the continental United States. Conservative estimates suggest 6+ million tons of recoverable lithium worth billions at current market value. While the commercial applications are obvious, the scientific value cannot be overstated. This ecosystem has evolved in isolation for thousands of years, creating a biological research opportunity comparable to the discovery of extremophiles at deep-sea vents. I am preparing a petition for immediate protected status designation, which should be filed before any development permits are considered for the region. The document was dated 3 days before the avalanche. Her mother had been preparing to go public with a discovery that would have completely derailed Blackwood's development plans. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Lily sat back, her mind racing. This was the proof she needed, not just of her mother's discovery, but potentially of a motive for murder. But who could she trust with this information? The local police, the Forest Service. Her grandfather. A soft knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. Lily quickly ejected the drive, replaced it in the pendant, and slipped the necklace over her head, tucking it beneath her shirt. Through her bedroom window, she could see her grandfather crossing the yard from the woodpile to answer the door. To her surprise, the visitor was Ethan Blackwood. The boy stood on the porch, hands shoved in his pockets, shoulders hunched against the cold. Even from a distance, Lily could read the tension in his posture as he spoke to Carl. Curiosity overcame caution. Lily moved into the hallway, positioning herself where she could hear without being seen. Just wanted to apologize for my dad yesterday, Ethan was saying. He gets intense about the development. Your father's business is his own, Carl replied stiffly. As long as he keeps it legal. Is Lily home? Ethan asked. I thought maybe she'd want to know about the town meeting Monday. They're discussing the wild horse management plan as part of the development approval. Lily's busy with schoolwork, Carl said. I'll let her know. Could you give her this? Ethan held out what appeared to be a folded piece of paper. It's information about the meeting. Lily heard the crinkle of paper being passed, then the sound of the door closing. Through the window, she watched Ethan walk back down the driveway, his shoulders slumped. Carl appeared in the hallway, looking unsurprised to find her eavesdropping. Wordlessly, he handed her the folded paper. It wasn't a flyer about the town meeting as he'd obviously assumed. It was a handwritten note. Lily, I know you were at the research station last night. We need to talk. I found something in my dad's office about your mom. Meet me at the old fire lookout tower at 2 p.m. today. Come alone. Ethan, Lily's heart raced as she read the words. Ethan knew she'd been at the station, yet he hadn't told his father. And he claimed to have information about her mother. Could it be a trap, or was Ethan reaching out as a potential ally? She looked up to find Carl watching her, his expression unreadable. Just information about the town meeting, she lied, folding the note and slipping it into her pocket. Carl nodded, though his eyes said he didn't believe her. I'll be working on the roof this afternoon, he said, fixing that leak before the snow comes. It was both information and a warning. He'd be up high with a clear view of anyone coming or going from the cabin. Lily would need to be careful if she intended to meet Ethan. As Carl returned to his woodpile, Lily retreated to her room conflicted. Meeting Ethan alone seemed dangerous, especially after what she'd witnessed last night. Yet if he truly had information about her mother, could she afford to ignore the opportunity she thought of Eclipse and his timely distraction at the research station? The stallion had protected her, led her to clues about her mother, shown her the herd in their vulnerable home. She needed to protect them in return, and that meant getting all the information she could about Blackwood's plans. Decision made, Lily began planning how to slip away unnoticed. The old fire lookout tower stood on a ridge 2 miles east of the Morgan cabin, offering panoramic views of the surrounding valleys. Once staffed during fire seasons, it had been automated years ago. The tower itself left as a historic landmark. It was a logical meeting place visible from a distance, but isolated enough for a private conversation. Lily approached cautiously, having managed to leave the cabin, while Carl was occupied on the far side of the roof. She'd taken a circuitous route through the forest, alert for any sign of surveillance or ambush, but the woods seemed peaceful, inhabited only by birds and small animals going about their autumn business. Ethan already waited at the base of the tower, pacing nervously. He wore a heavy jacket against the chill, his dark hair tousled by the wind. When he spotted Lily emerging from the trees, relief washed over his features. "You came," he said, as if he'd half expected her to ignore his note. What do you know about my mother?" Lily demanded, maintaining a cautious distance. Ethan glanced around, then gestured toward the tower. "Let's talk up there. Better view if anyone's coming." Lily hesitated, then nodded. The rusted metal stairs creaked under their weight as they climbed to the observation platform. From this height, they could see for miles in every direction: the forested slopes, the town of Aspen Ridge in the distance, and the valley where Blackwood planned his development. "I saw you at the research station last night," Ethan said once they'd settled on opposite sides of the platform. "I recognized your silhouette when you slipped through the wall. I led my dad away from your tracks on purpose." "Why?" Lily studied his face, searching for deception. Ethan looked down at his hands. "Because I don't think my dad's telling the truth about what happened to your mom." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded document. "I found this in his office safe. He doesn't know I know the combination." He handed the paper to Lily. It was a report from a private security firm dated the day of the avalanche. Surveillance of S. Morgan terminated at 09:45 hours following natural disaster avalanche at research site Alpha. Subject believed deceased. All equipment retrieved from site Beta per client instructions. No signs of research drive located. Recommend continued monitoring of secondary subjects. See Morgan L. Morgan for emergence of missing data. Lily's hands trembled as she read the words. "Your father had my mother under surveillance." Ethan nodded miserably. He was obsessed with her research. He knew it could stop his development plans. He hesitated, then added, "But I don't think he caused the avalanche, if that's what you're thinking. The report calls it a natural disaster." "But he deliberately misdirected the search and rescue teams," Lily said, her voice hardening. "He kept them away from her second research station. She might have survived if they'd searched there." "I know," Ethan whispered. "I only found out recently. That's why I wanted to talk to you." He looked up, his eyes haunted. "There's something else. The security firm is still active. They're watching you and your grandfather. And they've been setting traps for the black stallion, the one they call the Ghost." "Eclipse," Lily said. "Why?" "My dad believes the horse is somehow leading people to the research sites. It sounds crazy, but he's convinced of it." Ethan shook his head. "The trapper reported that someone freed the horse from a trap earlier this week. Was that you?" Lily nodded, seeing no reason to deny it. "Eclipse led me to a cave where I found a piece of my mother's jacket, with blood on it." Ethan's eyes widened. "So she did survive the initial avalanche." "I think so, and I think your father knows more than he's saying." Lily decided to take a risk. "Ethan, what do you know about the lithium deposits in the North Valley?" The boy looked startled. "How do you know about that?" "My mother's research. I found her data drive." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "The resort is just a cover. Dad's real interest is the lithium. He has investors lined up just waiting for the development permits to be approved. Once they have legal access to the land, they'll discover the lithium and pivot to mining. That's why the North Valley wasn't included in the first phase of development," Lily realized. He's keeping it quiet until he has control of the land. Exactly. Ethan looked miserable. My dad wasn't always like this. After my mom died in that horseback riding accident 6 years ago, something changed in him. He became obsessed with taming the wilderness, as he puts it. Says it's the only way to keep people safe. Lily remembered what her grandfather had said about Blackwood's wife. The pieces were fitting together, a grieving man channeling his pain into a mission, regardless of the cost to others. The town meeting on Monday is crucial, Ethan continued. If the council approves the development permit, the environmental review process will be fast-tracked. Once that happens, it'll be almost impossible to stop. Then we need to present my mother's research at that meeting, Lily said. Show them what's really at stake. Ethan shook his head. My father has too much influence with the council. Half of them have financial interests in the development. They'll dismiss the research as inconclusive demand, more studies delay until it's too late. Then what do we do? Lily demanded. Before Ethan could answer, a movement in the forest below caught their attention. A figure emerged from the trees, a tall, lean man, with the weathered face and watchful posture of someone accustomed to wilderness survival. He gazed up at the tower, making no attempt to hide his presence. Who is that? Ethan asked, tensing. Lily leaned forward, studying the stranger. He was in his 70s with a shock of white hair and a beard to match. Despite his age, he stood straight-backed and alert, his eyes sharp as they tracked the two teenagers in the tower. I think, Lily said slowly, that's FC, the man my mother was meeting the day before the avalanche. As if hearing her words, the man nodded once, then gestured for them to come down. There was a quiet authority in the gesture that compelled obedience. We should hear what he has to say, Lily decided, already moving toward the stairs. Ethan looked uncertain, but followed. By the time they reached ground level, the stranger had moved closer, positioning himself with his back to a large pine, maintaining a clear view of the surrounding forest. You're Sarah Morgan's girl, he said when they approached. His voice was gravelly from disuse, but his eyes were kind as they studied Lily. Got her look about you. Who are you? Lily asked, though she already suspected the answer. Frank Callahan, served with your grandfather in another lifetime. His gaze shifted to Ethan, hardening slightly. Blackwood's boy. Interesting company you're keeping, Miss Morgan. He's helping me, Lily said, surprised by her own defensive tone. He gave me proof that his father had my mother under surveillance. Frank nodded, unsurprised. Raymond always was thorough and ruthless when he wanted something. Did you know my mother? Lily asked. She found me about a year ago living up in my cabin, wanted to know about the old mining surveys from the 60s. A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. Smart woman, your mother. Figured out in months what the mining companies missed in years of exploration. The lithium deposits, Ethan said. Frank's eyebrows rose slightly. You've done your homework too, I see. My mother was supposed to meet you the day before the avalanche, Lily said. What happened? Frank's expression darkened. We met. She showed me her findings, wanted my help securing the area against Blackwood's people. Said she'd been noticing signs of surveillance equipment tampering. He sighed heavily. I told her to take her evidence straight to the federal authorities, bypass the local channels altogether. She was heading back to her research station to gather everything when the storm hit. And the avalanche, Lily said softly. Convenient timing. Frank's voice was neutral, but his eyes were hard, especially since the search teams were directed to the wrong location. You think it wasn't natural? Ethan asked, his face pale. Frank studied the boy for a long moment. Avalanches can be triggered. I've seen it done. An uncomfortable silence fell over the trio. Lily's mind raced with the implications. If the avalanche had been deliberately set... Have you been watching us? She asked Frank. I saw someone at the edge of the forest when we came back from town yesterday. Frank nodded. Been keeping an eye on you since you arrived. Promised your mother I would if anything happened to her. His gaze softened slightly. She loved you something fierce, Lily. Everything she did, the research, the documentation, the legal preparations, it was all to protect this wilderness for your future. Tears pricked at Lily's eyes, but she blinked them back. I found her data drive, she said, and I've been to the research station, but I still don't understand why she never told my grandfather about her discoveries. Carl and Raymond have history, Frank said. Complicated history. Your grandfather doesn't trust easily, and your mother knew that. She wanted irrefutable proof before bringing him into it. What kind of history? Lily pressed. Frank glanced at Ethan, then back to Lily. That's a conversation for another time. Right now, we need to focus on stopping Blackwood before Monday's meeting. He turned to Ethan. You're taking a risk being here, boy. Your father finds out you're helping us, there'll be hell to pay. Ethan straightened, a determination settling over his features that reminded Lily of his father, though, without the ruthless edge. My mother loved these mountains. Before she died, she used to take me riding in the valleys, taught me the names of every flower and tree. What my father's planning, it's not what she would have wanted. Frank nodded, a new respect in his eyes. All right then, we need a plan. For the next hour, the unlikely trio discussed strategies for the town meeting. Frank, with his deep knowledge of the local terrain and decades of wilderness experience, provided insights that complemented Lily's scientific evidence and Ethan's inside information about his father's operations. We can't just present the research, Frank concluded. Blackwood has too many allies on the council. We need to show them the stakes, make it personal. The horses, Lily said suddenly. Eclipse in the herd. If people could see them, understand what would be lost. A demonstration, Ethan caught on. Bring the council members to the valley, show them the horses, the hot springs, everything your mother discovered. Impossible. Frank shook his head. Blackwood would never allow it, and the council won't delay the vote for a field trip. Then we bring the evidence to them, Lily said, an idea forming. Visual evidence they can't ignore. Ethan, does your father's security team use cameras to monitor the wilderness? Trail cameras all over, Ethan confirmed. They download to a server at our house. Can you access the footage? A slow smile spread across Ethan's face. Already have. Dad doesn't know I figured out his password months ago. Good, Lily nodded. We need every image they've captured of the horses, especially Eclipse, and anything showing the unique features of the North Valley, the hot springs, the rare plants my mother documented. I've been photographing the area myself, Frank added. Got quite a collection over the years. Some from places those security goons haven't found yet. Perfect, Lily said. But we need more than just images. We need testimonials, people from town who care about preserving the wilderness. I know who can help with that, Frank said. Old friends who feel the same way I do about Blackwood's plans. As they finalized their strategy, the afternoon light began to fade. Frank glanced at the darkening sky with a tracker's instinct for weather. Storm coming in tomorrow, he predicted. You two should head back. I'll make contact with my people in town. He turned to Lily. The data drive, keep it safe. It's our strongest evidence. Lily touched the constellation pendant beneath her shirt. I will. As they prepared to leave, Frank placed a weathered hand on Lily's shoulder. Your mother would be proud of you, standing up for what she believed in. The simple words hit Lily with unexpected force. For months, she'd been trying to hold on to memories of her mother, fearing they would fade like morning mist. Now she was walking the same path, fighting the same fight. It connected them across the chasm of loss in a way nothing else had. Thank you, she whispered. Frank nodded, then melted back into the forest with the silent efficiency of a man who had made the wilderness his home. Lily and Ethan began their separate journeys home, agreeing to meet again the following afternoon to continue their preparations for Monday's showdown. As Lily neared her grandfather's cabin, the weight of all she'd learned pressed upon her. Her mother's research, Blackwood's surveillance, the possibility of deliberate sabotage, it was overwhelming. Yet alongside the fear and grief ran a current of determination stronger than anything she'd felt since coming to Aspen Ridge. The cabin came into view, smoke curling from the chimney against the backdrop of gathering clouds. Through the kitchen window, Lily could see her grandfather moving about preparing dinner with the same methodical precision he applied to all tasks. For the first time, she wondered what burdens he carried silently, what knowledge or suspicions he harbored about her mother's fate. Soon she would have to tell him everything. But not yet, not until she had all the pieces in place. A soft nickering drew her attention to the tree line. Eclipse stood in the shadows watching over her return. Lily raised a hand in greeting, and the stallion tossed his head in response before disappearing into the deepening twilight. With Eclipse guarding the forest and Frank Callahan, now revealed as an ally, Lily felt a spark of hope ignite within her. Her mother's fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Sunday dawned with leaden skies and a bitter wind that stripped the last stubborn leaves from the aspen trees. Lily woke early, her mind already racing with plans for the day ahead. She had agreed to meet Ethan at Frank's cabin that afternoon to compile their evidence and finalize their strategy for the town meeting. At breakfast, Carl seemed distracted, his gaze repeatedly drifting to the window where the first few snowflakes had begun to fall. "Going to be a big one," he said, nodding toward the thickening clouds. "First real snow of the season." Lily followed his gaze. "Will the roads be closed?" "Not likely. Town's good about plowing the main routes." He studied her over his coffee cup. "Any particular reason you're asking?" "Just wondering about the town meeting tomorrow," Lily said, keeping her tone casual. Carl's eyes narrowed slightly. "You planning on attending?" "I thought I might." She met his gaze steadily. "It affects us too, doesn't it? The development, the wilderness." A complex emotion crossed Carl's weathered face, surprise, concern, and something that might have been pride. "Yes," he said finally, "it does." They ate in silence for a few minutes before Carl spoke again. "Raymond Blackwood was here this morning before you woke up." Lily's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "What did he want?" "Said Ethan didn't come home last night. Wanted to know if I'd seen him." Ice slid down Lily's spine. "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that I hadn't." Carl's piercing gaze never left her face. "But I'm asking you now, Lily. Do you know where the Blackwood boy is?" Lily hesitated, torn between continuing her deception and trusting her grandfather. Frank's words echoed in her mind. Carl and Raymond have history. Complicated history. "No," she said finally. "I don't know where he is right now." It wasn't a complete lie. She had no idea if Ethan had gone home after their meeting or sought shelter elsewhere. But the careful phrasing clearly didn't fool her grandfather. "Lily," Carl set down his coffee cup with deliberate calm. "Whatever you're involved in, whatever you think you know, you need to be careful. Raymond Blackwood is not a man to cross lightly." The warning in his tone was unmistakable. "Is that why you and he aren't friends anymore?" Lily asked. "Because you crossed him." Carl's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Who told you we were ever friends?" "Frank Callahan." The name hit Carl like a physical blow. He sat back, color draining from his face. "You've spoken with Frank?" "Yesterday," Lily admitted. "He knew Mom, was helping her with her research." "Frank Callahan is dangerous," Carl said, his voice low and urgent. "He has his own agenda, his own vendettas. You can't trust him." "He's trying to protect what Mom discovered," Lily insisted. "The geothermal system, the lithium, deposits the wild horses." "How do you know about that?" Carl demanded, standing so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I found Mom's research drive," Lily said, touching the pendant beneath her shirt. "I know everything, Grandpa. I know Blackwood had her under surveillance. I know the search teams looked in the wrong place after the avalanche. I know she might have survived if they'd searched her second research station." Carl stared at her, shock warring with a terrible understanding in his eyes. "Lily," he said finally, his voice hollow, "there's something I need to tell you about your mother." But before he could continue, a frantic pounding on the front door interrupted them. Carl moved quickly to answer it, Lily close behind. Ethan Blackwood stood on the porch, snow dusting his dark hair, his face pale with fear and exertion. "He knows," he gasped. "My father knows everything. He found the security report missing from a safe. He's looking for Frank's cabin right now." "Where's Frank?" Lily demanded. "Already gone. He left a message at our meeting spot, said to bring everything to the Morgan cabin immediately." Ethan held up a weatherproof bag. "I have the camera footage, the photographs, everything we collected." Carl looked between the teenagers, his expression hardening into decision. "Both of you inside, now." Once the door was locked behind them, Carl turned to Ethan. "Start from the beginning. What exactly does your father know?" As Ethan explained the events of the past 24 hours, Carl's face grew increasingly grim. When the boy finished, the old ranger stood silent for a long moment, conflict evident in his eyes. "Lily," he said finally, There's a box in my bedroom closet. Black metal combination lock. Bring it here. Lily hurried to comply, finding the box buried beneath old clothing on the closet floor. It was heavier than it looked. The lock opened to the combination 0714, her birth month and day she realized with surprise. Inside lay documents, photographs, and a sealed envelope with her name written in her mother's handwriting. Carl took the envelope and handed it to her. Your mother left this with me before her last research trip, he said. Made me promise to give it to you if anything happened to her. I couldn't bring myself to do it, couldn't accept she was really gone. I'm sorry, Lily. With trembling fingers, Lily opened the envelope. Inside was a letter dated just days before the avalanche. My dearest Lily, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I hope it's simply that I'm delayed returning from the field, but I've learned to prepare for all contingencies. What I've discovered in these mountains goes beyond scientific importance. It's a legacy I want to preserve for your future. The wild horses, the thermal system, the unique ecosystem, they represent something precious and irreplaceable. Raymond Blackwood wants this land for its resources, but he doesn't understand its true value. He and your grandfather have a painful history. They were once friends along with Frank Callahan until a tragedy drove them apart. Carl will explain when the time is right. If I don't return, the evidence of my findings is hidden where only you would think to look in the constellation that has watched over you since birth. Use it wisely. Trust your grandfather and trust Frank. And most importantly, trust yourself. I've seen how the black stallion watches you when we're in the field. The locals call him a ghost, but I've come to believe he's something more, a guardian of this wilderness. Perhaps he'll watch over you as well. Remember that I love you beyond measure, and that protecting what matters most is always worth the risk. All my love. Mom tears blurred Lily's vision as she finished reading. She looked up to find her grandfather watching her, his own eyes suspiciously bright. She knew, Lily whispered. She knew she was in danger. Carl nodded heavily. Sarah was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. He turned to Ethan. Your father, how much time do we have before he comes looking here? Not long, Ethan admitted. He has people watching the cabin. That's why I came through the back way along the creek. Carl moved to the window, surveying the yard where snow was now falling steadily. Then we need to move quickly. The town meeting is our only chance to stop this publicly. He faced the teenagers, decision made. Show me what you got. Let's build a case that even Raymond Blackwood can't tear down. As they spread their evidence across the kitchen table, photographs, video clips, scientific data, and testimonials, a new sound rose above the whistle of the wind outside, the unmistakable whinny of a horse in distress. Lily rushed to the window. Through the curtain of snow, she could make out a dark shape at the edge of the yard, Eclipse rearing and pawing the ground in agitation. Something's wrong, she said, already reaching for her coat. Eclipse is trying to tell us something. Carl moved to her side, peering out at the stallion. That's the ghost, he murmured. Sarah's shadow. You knew about him? Lily asked, surprised. Your mother talked about him all the time. A sad smile touched Carl's lips. Said he was the smartest horse she'd ever encountered, almost supernatural in his awareness. Eclipse reared again, then turned and took several steps toward the forest before looking back expectantly. He wants us to follow him, Lily said with certainty. It could be a trap, Ethan warned. My father has been tracking that horse for months. Carl considered for only a moment before grabbing his rifle from the cabinet. Only one way to find out. He turned to Lily. Your mother trusted that horse, so will I. Together the 3 of them stepped out into the swirling snow, following the black stallion as he led them into the heart of the wilderness and toward whatever urgent message he had come to deliver. I've completed Part 2, 6,000 words of The Wilderness Call, following directly from Part 1. This section delves deeper into the mystery surrounding Lily's mother and establishes the central conflict against Raymond Blackwood's development plans. The snow swirled around them in thickening sheets as they followed Eclipse into the forest. The black stallion moved with purpose, occasionally looking back to ensure they were still following his crescent mark, a beacon in the gathering storm. Carl led the way, rifle cradled in his arms, eyes scanning the woods with the practiced vigilance of a former ranger. Lily followed close behind, with Ethan bringing up the rear. None of them spoke the urgency of Eclipse's summons, creating a tense silence broken only by the crunch of their boots on the snow-covered ground. The route seemed familiar to Lily. They were heading northeast toward the higher elevations, where her mother's research station lay hidden. But Eclipse veered away before they reached the ridge, leading them along a narrow game trail that wound through a dense stand of pines. "Where is he taking us?" Ethan whispered, his breath clouding in the cold air. "Don't know," Carl muttered, "but I recognize this trail. It leads to the old mining road." After 20 minutes of difficult hiking, the trees thinned, revealing a rutted dirt track half buried under years of fallen leaves and new snow. Eclipse paused at the edge of this abandoned road, ears pricked forward, listening intently. Carl raised a hand, signaling for Lily and Ethan to stop. "Something's not right," he whispered. Before Lily could ask what he meant, they heard the distant rumble of engines. Eclipse tossed his head and moved forward, following the old road. The three humans exchanged glances, then hurried after him. The sound of engines grew louder as they rounded a bend in the road. There, in a small clearing that had once served as a loading area for the defunct mine, sat three black SUVs. Men in dark clothing moved with military precision around the vehicle's unloading equipment. At the center of this activity stood Raymond Blackwood, his expensive coat incongruous against the rugged surroundings. Carl pulled Lily and Ethan back behind a fallen log, out of sight, but within earshot of the group. "What are they doing?" Lily whispered. "Nothing legal." Carl replied grimly, his eyes fixed on the scene. One of the men approached Blackwood, holding what appeared to be a satellite phone. "The weather window is closing fast, sir. If we're going to do this, it needs to be now." Blackwood nodded. "Proceed as planned. I want charges set at all the designated points. The snow will cover our tracks, and by the time anyone investigates, it'll look like a natural event triggered by the storm." "Charges?" Ethan whispered, his face paling. "He's talking about explosives." Carl's expression hardened. "He's going to trigger another avalanche. Bury the research station and any evidence it contains before the town meeting." Lily felt sick with realization. Just like he did to Mom. "We need to stop them," Ethan said, starting to rise. Carl pulled him back down. "There are at least 8 armed men down there. We're outmanned and outgunned." "Then what do we do?" Lily demanded. Carl's weathered face set in grim determination. "We gather evidence, right now." He pulled a small digital camera from his pocket. "I always carry this on hikes. Old habit from my ranger days." As Carl began taking photos of the operation below, Eclipse grew increasingly agitated, pawing at the ground and looking toward the northern ridge with anxious eyes. "What is it, boy?" Lily whispered, following his gaze. The ridge was barely visible through the thickening snow, but something about it tugged at Lily's memory. The cave, the one where Eclipse had led her to find the piece of her mother's jacket, was somewhere on that slope. "There's something up there he wants us to see," she said with sudden certainty. Carl finished documenting the illegal operation and tucked the camera securely in his pocket. "We need to get back to town, alert the authorities." "No," Lily shook her head. "Eclipse is trying to tell us something important. We need to follow him." She met her grandfather's skeptical gaze. "Mom trusted him, so do I." Carl hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but we move fast and stay out of sight." They retreated silently from their hiding place, Eclipse leading them away from the old mining road and up a steep, rocky path that wound toward the northern ridge. The going was difficult, the new snow making the terrain treacherous. Twice Lily nearly lost her footing on hidden ice, saved only by Carl's steadying hand. The wind intensified as they climbed higher, driving snow into their faces and reducing visibility to mere yards. Eclipse forged ahead, a dark shape against the white blur of the storm, somehow finding a path where none was visible to human eyes. "We shouldn't be up here in this weather," Ethan called over the howling wind. "If they set off those charges, this whole slope could come down." "We all the more reason to hurry," Carl replied, his voice tight with determination. After what seemed like hours but was likely only 40 minutes, Eclipse stopped before a familiar outcropping. Lily recognized it immediately, the entrance to the cave where she'd found the fragment of her mother's jacket. "Here," she said, pointing. "This is where he brought me before." Carl approached the cave entrance, cautiously, rifle ready. "Stay behind me," he ordered, ducking into the opening. The interior was as Lily remembered it, a shallow cave with a sandy floor. But something had changed. Fresh boot prints marked the sand, and a faint light glowed from deeper within, where before there had been only darkness. Carl motioned for silence as they crept forward. The cave extended further back than Lily had realized on her first visit, narrowing into a passage that twisted out of sight. The source of light lay beyond this turn. With cautious steps, they rounded the bend and froze in collective shock. The passage opened into a larger chamber illuminated by a battery-powered lantern. The space had been transformed into a makeshift shelter, with a sleeping bag, provisions, and rudimentary medical supplies arranged against one wall. But it was the figure seated beside the lantern that stole Lily's breath. A woman thin and pale, her once vibrant red hair now streaked with white. Her right leg was extended awkwardly before her, clearly injured. She looked up as they entered, her eyes the same bright green as Lily's, widening in disbelief. "Mom!" Lily's voice broke on the word, a sound somewhere between a question and a prayer. Sarah Morgan stared at her daughter, tears immediately filling her eyes. "Lily!" she whispered. "Oh my God, Lily!" Lily rushed forward, falling to her knees beside her mother and throwing her arms around the frail form. Sarah held her daughter tightly, both of them shaking with sobs. "You're alive," Lily kept saying, unable to form any other thought. "You're alive. Sarah." Carl's voice was thick with emotion as he moved forward, his weathered face transformed by wonder and disbelief. Sarah looked up at her father, her smile tremulous through her tears. "Dad, I knew you'd come eventually." How? The question encompassed so much more than the single word could express. How had she survived? How had she remained hidden for 8 months? How had they not found her? Eclipse. Sarah said simply, reaching out to stroke the stallion's nose as he pushed his way into the cave. "He found me after the avalanche led me to shelter. I was badly injured. My leg was broken. I had internal bleeding. I wouldn't have survived the first night without him." Ethan stood awkwardly at the edge of the reunion, but Sarah noticed him immediately. "Ethan Blackwood," she said, her voice cooling slightly. "You look like your father." "He's helping us," Lily explained quickly. "He found evidence that your avalanche wasn't an accident." Sarah nodded grimly. "I suspected as much. Raymond's men were following me for weeks before it happened." She shifted, wincing as she moved her injured leg. "But we don't have time for the full story now. Raymond is planning something today. I heard engines on the old mining road." "He's setting explosives," Carl confirmed, "planning to trigger another slide to bury the research station before tomorrow's town meeting." "Then we need to stop him," Sarah said, attempting to stand but falling back with a gasp of pain. "You're in no condition to go anywhere," Carl said firmly. "How bad is the leg?" "Compound fracture that never healed properly. I've been treating it as best I can, but—" She shrugged, the gesture encompassing the limited resources available to her. "Why didn't you try to contact us?" Lily asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the moment she'd seen her mother. Sarah's expression softened. "I tried, Lily. When I was stronger, I made it to the research station several times, hoping to find a working radio or satellite phone. But Raymond's men were always watching, and I was so weak." She touched her daughter's face gently. "I didn't want to put you in danger. Raymond thinks I'm dead. That's the only thing that's kept me safe. Until now," Ethan said grimly, "my father has men searching these mountains inch by inch. It's only a matter of time before they find this place." "He's right," Carl agreed. "We need to get you out of here, Sarah. Now." "I can't walk that far," Sarah admitted. "And in this storm—" "I'll carry you if I have to," Carl said, a fierce protectiveness in his voice that Lily had never heard before. "Wait," Lily interjected. "Blackwood's men are between us and town. We need a different route." Eclipse, who had been standing quietly by the cave entrance, suddenly nickered and trotted outside. A moment later, more whinnies answered from the storm. The wild herd had arrived. "They've been helping me gather food, keeping me warm at night," Sarah explained, a note of wonder still in her voice despite the months she'd spent with the horses. "Eclipse somehow communicates with them, organizes them." "They can help us now," Lily said, an idea forming. "We can ride them down the eastern slope, bypass Blackwood's men entirely." "Ride wild horses?" Ethan looked skeptical. "Is that even possible?" "For most people, no," Sarah smiled. "But Eclipse has been letting Lily ride him since she was 10 years old, and the rest of the herd follows his lead." "You knew?" Lily asked, surprised. "Of course I knew. Why do you think I started studying them in the first place?" Sarah's smile was bittersweet. I've never seen anything like the connection you have with that stallion. Outside, Eclipse pawed impatiently at the snow-covered ground. The storm was intensifying, visibility decreasing by the minute. Decision time, Carl said gruffly. If we're going, it needs to be now. Sarah nodded. Help me up. With Carl supporting most of her weight, Sarah hobbled to the cave entrance. The sight that greeted them was extraordinary. The entire wild herd, about 20 horses of various colors, stood waiting in the swirling snow. Eclipse stood closest to the cave, clearly ready to carry Lily. Beside him waited a dappled gray mare, gentler looking than the others. That's Mist, Sarah said. She's been my friend these past months. She'll carry me. The rest of us will have to manage as best we can, Carl said, eyeing the other horses with a ranger's assessment. I've ridden before, Ethan offered. Not bareback, but still. With careful movements, they helped Sarah onto Mist's back. The mare stood perfectly still during the awkward mounting process, as if understanding Sarah's fragility. Once Sarah was securely seated, Lily vaulted onto Eclipse's back with the ease of long practice. Carl approached a sturdy brown gelding that seemed calmer than the others. After a moment of mutual assessment, the horse allowed him to climb onto its back. Ethan, following Carl's example, managed to mount a smaller pinto. Stay close, Sarah instructed. The herd knows these mountains better than any map. They'll find the safest path down. With Eclipse in the lead, the strange procession moved away from the cave and down the eastern slope of the ridge. The horses picked their way carefully through the storm, their sure-footedness a blessing on the treacherous terrain. Lily rode without any tack, her hands buried in Eclipse's mane, her body moving in instinctive harmony with his. They had traveled perhaps half a mile when the ground beneath them trembled. A distant rumble grew to a roar, and even through the curtain of snow they could see the catastrophe unfolding on the northern face of the mountain, an avalanche massive and violent, exactly where the research station had stood. He did it, Ethan said, his voice hollow with shock. My father actually did it. Just like before, Sarah said grimly, but this time we have proof. Carl patted the pocket containing his camera. And witnesses. They continued their descent, the horses navigating by some internal compass that guided them unerringly through the whiteout conditions. After an hour of slow, careful progress, the forest began to thicken around them, indicating they had reached lower elevations where the storm was less severe. We're near the eastern fire road, Carl observed. From there, it's a straight shot to town. Not yet, Sarah said. There's something we need first. She gestured to Eclipse, who had turned onto a narrow path leading to a small clearing. In the center stood a weather-beaten shed, nearly hidden by overgrown vegetation. My emergency cache, Sarah explained as they dismounted before the structure. I've maintained these throughout the research area for years. Inside the shed, they found supplies, food medical equipment, warm clothing, and a waterproof case containing backup drives of Sarah's research data. I always kept copies in multiple locations, she said with grim satisfaction as she retrieved the case. Raymond may have destroyed the research station, but he hasn't destroyed the evidence. Newly provisioned and with the crucial backup data secure, they remounted the horses and continued toward town. The storm was beginning to ease as they reached lower elevations, and by the time they emerged onto the fire road, visibility had improved significantly. We need to go directly to the sheriff, Carl said. With Sarah alive and my photos of Blackwood's operation, we can have him arrested before the town meeting even starts. No, Sarah shook her head firmly. The sheriff is deep in Raymond's pocket, has been for years. We need to take this public force a confrontation where he can't control the narrative. The town meeting, Lily realized, with everyone watching. Exactly, Sarah nodded. Raymond has spent years cultivating his image as Aspen Ridge's benefactor. Let's see how that holds up when he's confronted with evidence of attempted murder and environmental sabotage. But how do we get there safely? Ethan asked. My father will have people looking for us by now. We don't go home, Carl decided. We go to Frank's cabin. It's closer and Raymond doesn't know its exact location. Sarah smiled faintly. Frank's still up here then. Good, we'll need him. As they set off toward Frank's cabin, Lily rode alongside her mother, still hardly able to believe she was real alive breathing. I missed you so much, she said softly. Every day. Sarah reached across the space between their horses to squeeze Lily's hand. I missed you more than I can say. The thought of seeing you again, it's what kept me going through the darkest days. Eclipse led me to you, Lily said. He knew all along you were alive. He's extraordinary, Sarah agreed, looking at the stallion with deep affection. The locals call him a ghost, but I've come to think of him as something else, a guardian spirit of these mountains. He protects what matters most. The words echoed those in Sarah's letter, reminding Lily of the constellation pendant still hanging around her neck. I found your data drive, she said, touching the necklace. I've read your research, has seen what you discovered. Pride shone in Sarah's eyes. Then you understand what we're fighting for. It's not just about stopping a resort development. It's about preserving something irreplaceable for science, for the future, for you. As they continued their journey through the snow-hushed forest, Lily felt a profound shift within herself. The hollow ache of grief that had been her constant companion for 8 months was transforming into something else, a fierce determination to protect what her mother had nearly died to preserve. Eclipse seemed to sense this change in her, his stride becoming more purposeful, his ears pricked forward toward the challenges that lay ahead. Together, they would face whatever came next. Frank Callahan's cabin perched on a rocky outcropping overlooking a steep ravine, its weathered logs blending so perfectly with the surrounding forest that one could pass within 20 yards and never notice it. This natural camouflage had served Frank well during his decades living in self-imposed isolation. He was waiting for them when they arrived, standing on his small porch with a rifle cradled in his arms. As the strange procession of wild horses carrying human riders emerged from the trees, a rare smile cracked his weathered face. "Sarah Morgan," he said, shaking his head in wonder. "I should have known death couldn't hold on to you." "It wasn't for lack of trying," Sarah replied wryly as Carl helped her dismount. Frank's cabin was Spartan but warm, a fire already blazing in the stone hearth. He moved with the efficiency of a military man, clearing space, gathering medical supplies, and setting water to boil without needing to be asked. As Carl tended to Sarah's injured leg with supplies from both the emergency cache and Frank's own stores, Lily, Ethan, and Frank spread their evidence across the rough-hewn table. The camera footage from Blackwood's security system, Frank's photographs of the unique ecosystem, Sarah's research data, and now Carl's photos of the illegal explosives operation together, they formed a damning case against Raymond Blackwood. "We need to organize this," Frank said, his tactical mind already formulating a strategy. "Create a presentation that even the most development-hungry council member can't ignore." "It won't be easy," Ethan warned. "My father has been working these people for years. Some have financial stakes in the project." "Then we appeal to something stronger than greed," Sarah said from her seat by the fire. "We appeal to their connection to the land itself." Outside, the wild horses had withdrawn to the edge of the clearing, finding shelter beneath the thick evergreens. Only Eclipse remained near the cabin, standing sentinel in the falling snow. Lily watched him through the window, drawing strength from his steadfast presence. "The meeting starts at 7 p.m. tomorrow," Frank said, checking his watch. "That gives us less than 24 hours to prepare. And we can bet Raymond's already spinning a story about why we've disappeared," Carl added grimly. "Probably claiming I've kidnapped Ethan or some such nonsense." "Let him spin," Sarah said, a steely determination in her voice. "The truth has a weight that lies can never match." Through the remainder of the afternoon and into the evening, they worked on their presentation. Sarah, despite her injury and exhaustion, provided crucial scientific context for her findings. Frank contributed his knowledge of the local terrain and history. Carl added his expertise as a former ranger, highlighting the ecological importance of the wilderness area. Lily and Ethan organized the visual evidence, creating a compelling narrative that would be difficult to dismiss. As night fell, Frank insisted Sarah take his bed, while the others made do with bedrolls near the fire. Despite the cramped conditions and the tension of what lay ahead, there was a sense of rightness in their shared purpose that brought a measure of peace. Lily lay awake long after the others had fallen asleep, watching the firelight dance across the cabin's ceiling. So much had changed in a single day. Her mother was alive. The mystery partially solved their path forward, clear if dangerous. Yet questions remained. What was the history between her grandfather Frank and Raymond Blackwood that no one wanted to discuss? How had her mother survived alone for 8 months with a badly broken leg? and what would happen to Eclipse and the wild herd once this battle was over. As if summoned by her thoughts, a soft nickering came from outside the cabin. Lily rose quietly and moved to the window. Eclipse stood in the moonlight snow, dusting his dark coat, the crescent mark on his forehead, gleaming like a star. Pulling on her coat, Lily slipped outside. The night was clear now, the storm having moved on, leaving behind a pristine blanket of snow that sparkled under the moon's glow. Her breath formed clouds in the frigid air as she approached the stallion. "We're going to protect your home," she promised, stroking his powerful neck. "No matter what it takes." Eclipse nudged her shoulder gently, his intelligent eyes seeming to understand every word. In that moment, Lily felt the full weight of the connection between them, not just horse and human, but two beings united in defense of something greater than themselves. A soft footstep in the snow alerted her to another presence. She turned to find her grandfather standing a few yards away, watching them with an unreadable expression. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, moving to join her. Lily shook her head. "Too much to think about." Carl nodded, his gaze shifting to Eclipse. "Your mother always said this horse was special. Now I understand what she meant. Why didn't you tell me there was a chance she might be alive?" Lily asked the question she'd been holding back since the cave. Carl was silent for a long moment. "Because I couldn't bear to give you false hope," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "The search teams were so certain, and I couldn't face the possibility that she might be out there suffering while I failed to find her." "It wasn't your fault," Lily said suddenly, understanding the guilt her grandfather had been carrying. "Blackwood deliberately misdirected the search. I should have known better, should have searched more extensively." Carl's hand reached out tentatively, touching Eclipse's mane with cautious wonder. "If I'd paid attention to what Sarah said about this horse, maybe I would have." Eclipse stood perfectly still, allowing the contact, his eyes watchful but unafraid. "What happened between you and Blackwood?" Lily asked. "Mom's letter mentioned a painful history." Carl sighed heavily. "That's a long story, and not entirely mine to tell. But you deserve to know the basics." He gazed out at the moonlit forest. "Raymond, Frank, and I served together in Vietnam. Special Operations Unit. We saw things, did things. It creates a bond that's hard to explain. After the war, we all ended up back here in Montana, drawn to the peace of these mountains. And then Raymond met Eleanor, his wife. She was a wildlife photographer passionate about conservation. She changed him, or so we thought. They had Ethan build a life here. Frank and I stayed single, devoted to our own paths, me as a ranger, Frank living his solitary existence in the backcountry." Carl paused, his expression darkening with memory. "Then came the accident. Eleanor was photographing the wild horses when her own horse spooked near a cliff edge. She fell. By the time Raymond found her, it was too late." "That's terrible," Lily said softly. "It broke something in him," Carl continued. "He blamed the wilderness, blamed the wild horses, blamed himself for letting her venture out alone. But mostly he blamed Frank and me for encouraging her passion for conservation, for teaching her to ride into the backcountry. And that's why he wants to develop the wilderness now, to tame it." Carl nodded. "In his mind, civilization equals safety. The wild equals danger. It's twisted logic born from grief, but he believes it absolutely." He looked at Lily directly. "When your mother started her research, Raymond saw it as a threat to his plans. And when she discovered the geothermal system and lithium deposits, she became a direct obstacle. So he tried to kill her," Lily said, anger flaring hot despite the cold night. "Just like he tried to kill us today." "Raymond has convinced himself he's doing the right thing," Carl said. "That makes him more dangerous than someone who knows they're doing wrong." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future hanging between them. Eclipse shifted restlessly, as if sensing their turbulent emotions. "We should get some rest," Carl finally said. "Tomorrow will test us all." As they turned back toward the cabin, Eclipse suddenly raised his head, ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring. A low warning nicker escaped him. "What is it?" Lily whispered, instantly alert. Carl's posture changed, the ranger's instincts taking over as he scanned the darkened forest. "Something's out there," he murmured. A twig snapped in the distance, followed by the soft crunch of snow under boots. Multiple boots approaching with attempt at stealth. Inside, Carl ordered, already moving. Now. They hurried back to the cabin, Carl securing the door behind them, while Lily woke the others. Frank was instantly alert, reaching for his rifle before his eyes were fully open. "Company?" he asked tersely. Carl nodded. "Coming through the north woods. At least 3, maybe more." "Blackwood's men," Ethan said, face pale in the dying firelight. "They must have tracked us somehow. Or they've been watching Frank's cabin all along," Sarah suggested, struggling to sit up despite her injury. Frank moved to the window, careful to stay hidden as he peered into the darkness. 4 men armed, approaching in standard search pattern. "How did they find us?" Lily asked. "Doesn't matter now," Carl said grimly. "What matters is getting Sarah and the evidence to that town meeting." Frank nodded, already moving to a concealed trapdoor in the cabin floor. "Tunnel leads to a cave about half a mile east. Built it during the Cold War. Paranoia has its uses." "We can't all go," Carl said, his mind working rapidly. "They'll hear us, follow us. Someone needs to stay. Create a diversion." "I'll stay," Frank said immediately. "This is my cabin, my fight." "Not alone," Carl countered. "I'm staying too." Sarah shook her head vehemently. "No, we all go or no one does." "There's no time to argue," Frank insisted. "Carl and I will hold them off. You 3 get to town with the evidence." "How?" Ethan asked. "It's 15 miles through deep snow." A soft nickering from outside provided the answer. Eclipse and the wild herd were still there waiting. "The horses," Lily said. "They'll take us." Decision made, they moved quickly. Sarah gathered the evidence into waterproof bags while Frank showed Lily and Ethan the tunnel entrance. Carl checked his rifle, positioning himself by the window. "Be careful," Lily told her grandfather, fear gripping her heart at the thought of leaving him behind. Carl's weathered face softened as he looked at his granddaughter. "I spent 20 years as a ranger in these mountains. Frank and I can handle a few hired guns." He pulled her into a brief, fierce hug. "Go. Get your mother to safety. We'll see you at the town meeting." The last Lily saw of her grandfather and Frank was their determined faces as they closed the trap door above her. Then she was following Ethan through the narrow tunnel, supporting her mother, between them, moving toward an uncertain escape. The tunnel was low and damp, forcing them to crouch as they hurried forward. Sarah moved as quickly as her injured leg would allow, leaning heavily on Lily and Ethan. No one spoke, their breathing and the soft scrape of their feet the only sounds in the confined space. Behind them, muffled by earth and distance, came the sharp crack of gunfire. "Keep moving," Sarah urged when Lily hesitated, looking back. They knew what they were doing. After what seemed like an eternity, but was likely only 15 minutes, they reached the tunnel's end. A crude ladder led up to another trapdoor, this one opening into a small cave mouth, concealed by dense undergrowth. Ethan climbed up first, checking that the coast was clear, before helping Sarah and then Lily up. Outside, the night was crystal clear, stars blazing overhead in a black velvet sky. And there, waiting in the shadows of the trees, stood Eclipse and 3 other horses from the wild herd. "He knew," Lily whispered in wonder. "Somehow he knew we'd come out here." They mounted quickly, Sarah again on the gentle gray mare, Ethan on the pinto, and Lily on Eclipse. The horses seemed to understand the urgency, setting off immediately at a ground-covering pace through the deep snow. They traveled for hours, following game trails and old logging roads, the horses unerringly finding the easiest path through the difficult terrain. The moon set, leaving only the stars to guide them. Lily's body ached with cold and fatigue, but she drew strength from Eclipse, who moved tirelessly beneath her. Dawn was breaking as they reached the outskirts of Aspen Ridge, the eastern sky lightening to a pale gray, streaked with pink. They paused at the edge of the forest, the town spread out below them. "We can't just ride in on wild horses," Ethan pointed out. "We need a plan." "I know someone who can help," Sarah said. "Martha Harding, she runs the veterinary clinic on Pine Street. She's an old friend, and her house backs up to the woods." With renewed purpose, they skirted the town's edge until they reached a modest house with a small barn behind it. As they approached, a woman emerged from the back door, alerted by the sound of horses. She stood frozen in disbelief, a coffee mug halfway to her lips, as she registered who sat on the lead horse. "Sarah Morgan," she finally managed. "My God." "Hello, Martha," Sarah said with a tired smile. "We could use some help." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Martha, after recovering from her shock, proved an invaluable ally. She called her husband a retired doctor who properly treated Sarah's leg. She provided food, warm clothing, and most importantly, a secure place to organize their evidence and plan their approach to the town meeting. By late afternoon, news had spread through Aspen Ridge that something significant would be revealed at the evening's council meeting. Martha had quietly contacted trusted friends and colleagues, ensuring a large turnout of community members, not beholden to Blackwood's influence. Still, there was no word from Carl or Frank. Each passing hour increased Lily's anxiety about what might have happened at the cabin. Sarah, too, grew increasingly tense, though she focused her energy on preparing her presentation of the scientific evidence. "Mom," Lily said as they reviewed the materials one final time, "what happens to Eclipse and the herd after all this? Even if we stop Blackwood's development, the horses will still be vulnerable." Sarah smiled, a hint of her old confidence returning. "I've thought about that. Part of my petition includes designating the North Valley as a wild horse sanctuary with protected status under federal law. If we win this fight, Eclipse and his herd will have a permanent home." "And us?" Lily asked softly. "What happens to us?" Sarah reached out to touch her daughter's face gently. "We rebuild. Together. There's a lot of healing ahead, but we'll face it as a family." Her expression grew more serious. "First, though, we have to win tonight's battle." As evening approached, they made final preparations. Ethan would enter the town hall first, taking a position near the back to monitor who attended. Martha and her husband would escort Sarah, whose appearance would create the maximum impact at the critical moment. Lily would manage the visual presentation, ensuring the evidence was presented clearly and compellingly. "What about the horses?" Lily asked as they prepared to leave Martha's house. "They've returned to the forest for now," Sarah said. "But they won't go far. Eclipse never does." The town hall was packed by the time they arrived, the audience a mix of curious locals, Blackwood supporters, and those Martha had rallied to their cause. At the front of the room, the town council members sat behind a long table. Mayor Jenkins at the center, with Raymond Blackwood seated prominently in the front row. Ethan, positioned near the back door, as planned, caught Lily's eye and gave a subtle nod. No sign of Carl or Frank yet, but the meeting was just beginning. Mayor Jenkins called the session to order, explaining that the purpose was to vote on final approval for the Aspen Ridge Mountain Resort development. Raymond Blackwood was invited to make his presentation first. As Blackwood approached the podium, Lily studied the man who had tried to kill her mother, who might at this very moment have the blood of her grandfather and Frank Callahan on his hands. He appeared completely composed, immaculately dressed in an expensive suit, his silver hair perfectly styled. Nothing in his demeanor suggested a man who had ordered an avalanche triggered mere hours ago. "Friends and neighbors," he began, his voice smooth with practiced charm, "tonight represents the culmination of years of planning and investment in the future of Aspen Ridge. The mountain resort will bring jobs, prosperity, and sustainable growth to our community while preserving the natural beauty that makes this place special." He continued for several minutes, outlining economic benefits, conservation measures, and community enhancements. His presentation was slick, professional, and persuasive. Several council members nodded approvingly as he spoke. Before we move to questions and the final vote, Blackwood concluded, "I'd like to address a rumor that's been circulating today. Yes, there was a small avalanche in the North Valley during yesterday's storm, a natural event that fortunately harmed no one. My development team had monitoring equipment in the area that recorded the event, which simply reinforces the need for the controlled access and safety measures our resort will provide." The audacity of the lie made Lily's blood boil. Beside her, hidden from the audience's view, Sarah squeezed her hand in silent warning. "Not yet." Mayor Jenkins thanked Blackwood and opened the floor for public comments, limiting each speaker to 3 minutes. Several residents spoke in favor of the development, their comments sounding rehearsed and overly enthusiastic to Lily's ears. A few voiced environmental concerns, but were quickly assured by Blackwood that these had been addressed in the planning. As the public comment period neared its end, Mayor Jenkins called for any final speakers. This was their moment. Lily stepped forward first, moving to the podium with a flash drive containing their evidence. "My name is Lily Morgan." She began, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "I'd like to present some information relevant to this development proposal. Raymond Blackwood's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a tightening around the eyes, a slight tensing of his shoulders. He recognized the threat even if he didn't yet know its extent. I have evidence, Lily continued, connecting the flash drive to the town hall's projection system, that Mr. Blackwood's development plans involve much more than a resort. Images appeared on the screen behind her, Sarah's research data, showing the geothermal system, the unique ecosystem, the lithium deposits. Murmurs ran through the audience as Lily explained the scientific significance of these findings. These discoveries would qualify the North Valley for protected status, she explained, which would prevent not just a resort, but the lithium mining operation that is Mr. Blackwood's true objective. Blackwood rose from his seat, his composure cracking. This is absurd. This child has no authority to present scientific claims. I move that we proceed to the vote immediately. I'm not finished, Lily said firmly. There's more you need to see. The next images shocked the room into silence. Carl's photographs of Blackwood and his men unloading explosives on the old mining road, followed by satellite images showing the resulting avalanche. Mr. Blackwood deliberately triggered that avalanche yesterday to destroy evidence of these discoveries, Lily stated, just as he did 8 months ago in an attempt to silence the scientist who made them. This is slander, Blackwood shouted, his face flushing with anger. Mayor Jenkins, I demand this presentation be stopped immediately. The mayor, visibly shaken by the images, hesitated. These are serious accusations, Miss Morgan. Do you have any corroboration for these claims? Yes, Lily said, turning toward the back of the room. I do. The doors swung open and a collective gasp rose from the assembled crowd. Sarah Morgan entered, supported by Martha Harding on one side, and to Lily's immense relief, Carl Morgan on the other. Behind them came Frank Callahan, his weathered face sporting a fresh cut above one eye, but otherwise unharmed. Hello, Raymond, Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. It's been a while. Shuri. Raymond Blackwood's face drained of color. This is impossible, he whispered. You're dead. Rumors of my death were greatly exaggerated, Sarah replied, making her way slowly to the front of the room. Thanks in large part to your efforts to ensure no one looked in the right places. What followed was testimony more powerful than Lily could have imagined. Sarah speaking with the authority of her scientific credentials and the moral weight of someone who had nearly died for her discoveries presented the full extent of what the North Valley contained: a geothermal system that could provide clean energy for generations, an ecosystem with species found nowhere else on Earth, and yes, valuable minerals that belonged to the public, not to private developers. Carl and Frank testified about the previous night's confrontation at the cabin, how they had managed to capture 2 of Blackwood's men, who, when faced with criminal charges, had quickly implicated their employer. Throughout it all, Raymond Blackwood sat rigidly in his chair, watching his carefully constructed plans collapse around him. When his gaze met Ethan's across the room, something flickered in his eyes: betrayal, confusion, perhaps a glimmer of understanding. The choice before you tonight isn't just about a development permit, Sarah concluded, addressing the council directly. It's about the legacy we leave for our children. It's about whether we value short-term profit over irreplaceable natural treasures. It's about who we are as a community and what we stand for. A profound silence fell over the room as Sarah finished speaking. Then slowly people began to rise to their feet. First Martha and her husband, then others throughout the audience, until nearly everyone stood in silent support. Even several council members rose from their seats behind the table. Mayor Jenkins cleared his throat, visibly moved. In light of this extraordinary testimony and evidence, I believe we need to postpone the vote on the development permit and refer these matters to the appropriate authorities. He looked directly at Raymond Blackwood, including the criminal allegations. As if on cue, the town sheriff entered with 2 deputies, not Blackwood's allies as Sarah had feared, but state troopers responding to evidence Carl and Frank had managed to get to the authorities during the night. Raymond Blackwood, the lead officer, announced, "You're under arrest for attempted murder, criminal conspiracy, environmental sabotage, and fraud." As Blackwood was led away in handcuffs, his gaze locked briefly with Lily's. In his eyes, she saw not the monster she had expected, but a broken man consumed by grief and misguided purpose. It didn't excuse his actions, but it helped her understand them. Ethan approached his father as he passed. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said quietly. "But Mom would have wanted to protect this place, not destroy it." Something shifted in Raymond's expression, a flicker of the man he had once been, before loss had hardened him. "She loved those mountains," he admitted, his voice barely audible. Then the moment passed and he was gone, escorted from the hall into the cold night. As the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with the evening's dramatic events, Lily found herself standing with her mother, grandfather, and Frank near the podium. They were joined by Ethan, who looked simultaneously relieved and devastated. "What happens now?" Lily asked, the adrenaline of the confrontation beginning to fade. "Now," Sarah said, "we heal, we rebuild, we protect what we've saved." A commotion at the doors drew their attention. People were pointing outside, exclaiming in wonder. Lily moved to the entrance and looked out into the town square. There, illuminated by the streetlights, stood Eclipse, regal, untamed, unafraid. Behind him, partially hidden in the shadows at the edge of town, waited the wild herd. "He's come to make sure we succeeded," Lily said as the others joined her. "No," Sarah smiled, understanding in her eyes. "He's come to lead us home." Spring came to Aspen Ridge in a rush of snowmelt and wildflowers. The North Valley, now officially designated as the Morgan Wilderness Preserve, burst into vibrant life as the long winter receded. On a sun-dappled afternoon in May, Lily stood on the porch of the newly established Morgan Research Center, built on the site of her grandfather's cabin, expanded now to accommodate visitors, students and scientists, drawn to study the unique ecosystem her mother had discovered. Sarah emerged from the center, moving with only a slight limp, a permanent reminder of her ordeal, but no longer a significant hindrance. "Ready for the tour?" she asked, her eyes bright with purpose and contentment. Lily nodded, falling into step beside her mother as they walked toward the waiting group of high school students, the first of many educational programs the center would host. Among them stood Ethan Blackwood, who had become a regular volunteer at the research center, finding healing and helping protect what his father had sought to destroy. Carl and Frank waited with the group, the two old soldiers, having rekindled their friendship through shared purpose. They now co-directed the Preserve's Ranger program, their decades of wilderness experience proving invaluable. As Sarah began explaining the center's mission to the students, Lily's attention was drawn to movement at the forest's edge. Eclipse stood watching the white crescent on his forehead, catching the sunlight. Beside him pranced a small black foal, also marked with a crescent, his offspring, continuing the legacy of the wild herd. Lily smiled, a deep sense of rightness settling over her. The journey had been painful, filled with loss and struggle, but it had led to this moment of renewal and purpose. The wilderness had called, and they had answered, not just for themselves, but for all who would come after. Eclipse tossed his head as if in agreement, then turned and led his young charge back into the forest, not vanishing like a ghost this time, but moving with the confident stride of a creature secure in its home, protected at last. Lily watched them go, then turned back to join her family and the waiting students. There were trails to walk, wonders to share, and a future to build, one that honored the delicate balance between wilderness and civilization, between freedom and protection. The call of the wild remained, but now it sang not of danger and loss, but of healing and hope. The seasons turn as they always have. Snow melts into wildflowers. Wounds heal, leaving scars that remind rather than pain. In the quiet moments between scientific discovery and wilderness protection, Lily often stands at the forest's edge watching, waiting. Eclipse appears like he always does, silent, majestic, a dark silhouette against the fading light, his crescent mark catching the last rays of sun. What remains after loss and betrayal have done their worst. What grows in the spaces grief once hollowed out. For Lily Morgan, the answer runs deeper than the thermal springs beneath the valley floor. Stronger than the bond between horse and human. More precious than any mineral wealth hidden beneath ancient stone. We find our truest selves in what we choose to protect, in what we refuse to surrender, in the battles we fight not for ourselves, but for those who cannot speak, whether family long thought lost or creatures who communicate only through trust freely given. The wilderness does not belong to us. Perhaps we belong to it, wild hearts tamed just enough to build bridges between worlds, but never completely domesticated. As Eclipse disappears once more into the gathering dusk, his foal dancing at his side, Lily understands the most important lesson of all. Some calls must be answered not because they are easy to hear, but because ignoring them would silence the very part of ourselves that makes us truly alive.